Hey, this is John Hatcher with Blues Guitar Institute, and you're watching the Musicality Podcast.
Hi, I'm Christopher, founder of Musical U, and welcome to the Musicality Podcast. Today I'm joined on the show by John Hatcher, the founder of Blues Guitar Institute, a website and YouTube channel devoted to teaching acoustic blues guitar with a simple, straightforward approach. John was the winner of TrueFire's Next Top Guitar Instructor contest, and over the last several years, he's been steadily growing a devoted following of keen blues guitarists. I had been struck by how John incorporates theory and ear training into his teaching, and makes a genre that's often seen as very specialized and exclusive into something welcoming and accessible. So I was keen to invite him on the show to share more about learning an instrument in a balanced way and how to explore the blues. In this conversation, we talk about why chasing flashy instrument technique can harm your development as a musician. We discuss what the earliest blues musicians would have to say about the idea that you need to be born with the blues to play it. And John shares his innovative Microlicks approach to breaking free from formulaic solos and being more creative when you improvise. Naturally, this episode will be of particular interest to guitarists and blues fans, but there are lots of interesting ideas here for any musician, so I hope you will enjoy the conversation as much as I did. My name's Christopher Sutton, and this is the Musicality Podcast from Musical U. Welcome to the show, John. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Christopher. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
So, blues is a genre that's often steeped in backstories and interesting characters, and I'd love to hear your own origin story in music. Where did John Hatcher, leader of Blues Guitar Institute, come from as a musician?
Well, as far back as I can remember, I've loved music, but I think the drawing point that kind of drew me in with guitar and really exploring music deeper was I was a kid, maybe I was 10 or 12 or so, and I found an old beat up acoustic guitar in the back of a closet that was my dad's from his college days. And I knew he had played, but seeing that thing was, I don't know, it was just like a spark for me. And I remember kind of sneaking away, opening the closet and reaching back there and kind of plucking the rusted strings a little bit. And I was just mesmerized by the sound of it. And then at some point I had the nerve to ask him, hey, can I play that thing? And he pulled it out, put some new strings on it, taught me G, C, and D chords. And I was kind of off to the races from there. Never really hung it up after that.
Fantastic. And was your dad, it sounds like your dad wasn't still playing at that point. Was there music in the household?
There was. I mean, I can remember, riding around and he would have a lot of 70s classic rock stuff on, which is what I think I really fell in love with in my early days playing, which is kind of it's a direct connection back to the blues. A lot of the 70s guitar icons just really touted a lot of older generation of blues players. So, but yeah, he had quit playing for the most part by then, and it was. But I think it was good for him. It was good for both of us, really, to just kind of drag it out and start strumming again.
Very cool. And so he showed you G, C, and D. What came next? How did you continue learning guitar from there?
Well, he and I went to the store and we bought a poster that had all of the guitar chords on it. And he circled a few. I mean, G, C, and D were like, yeah, you got to know that. And then he circled a few minor chords and he was like, check these out, learn these, get these down. And then we'll move on. It gets a little bit fuzzy from there, but I definitely remember that poster and just, having those chords circled and then just trying like day and night to get those things under my fingers.
And did you continue learning with your dad? Did you take lessons? Were you self-taught?
No, I self-taught, but with an asterisk. My good friend William, at the same time he was kind of coming into guitar, he inherited a really nice Gibson acoustic guitar from his grandfather, and we were friends from school, and I think he told me about it, and we were actually playing baseball in Little League together. And at some point I remember sneaking away from baseball practice with him and going to check out this guitar that he brought along. And we were both just supposed to be playing baseball, supposed to be practicing, and we were just drawn to this old acoustic guitar, couldn't take our eyes off of it. And same thing, just strumming the strings, doing what we could do. And I don't know, it just fell in love with that guitar specifically, but then, sort of the greater idea of making music, and it was way cooler to me than being poor at baseball, which I was. So, um, but so he ended up taking some lessons from the local guitar teacher, and so he would go and learn a few things, and then I would get together with him and just kind of pick up what he was picking up, and so we kind of were self-taught, but together in a way.
And you mentioned making music there. When you got together with your friend, what kind of stuff were you doing? You know, would you sit down with a particular song and try and figure it all out? Were you just making it up? Were you jamming back and forth? What did that look like?
I think maybe some of all of the above. From the moment we could get a good chord to sound, we would end up just kind of writing something, just jamming on something. It was horrible. I mean, don't yeah, don't mistake it for any magic or anything. But it was fun, and we had a lot of fun. And I don't. We obviously wanted to sound really good, but we just had tons of fun, Christopher. It was just what kept us coming back, And then eventually we started learning some tunes that, this was in the 90s, so we were playing some Nirvana songs and things like that. And there were definitely some easy strummers in that catalog, and so we would strum those along, and then friends would come over and listen to us strum a couple of songs, and we just felt like, I don't know, like amazing that we could kind of create this music. It was good.
Cool. And how did things progress from there?
I think we probably stayed in in that phase of just kind of hanging out and playing for a little while, maybe longer than we should have. At some point, though, I think we did start to take things a little more seriously, but we really started to focus on heavy metal. And the thing that we definitely connected on was Metallica. We were huge Metallica fans. And it was just it was a raw music form. It was fast. It was loud. We were both, teenagers or almost teenagers at the time. And it just appealed to us. And it required a lot of dexterity, a lot of practice, a lot of technical, facilities to be able to pull it off. And he and I bought tab books for most all of their albums, at least they were out to that date, and just started learning nothing about music, but learning how to replicate what we were hearing on their records, and formed a band and started just doing covers from that, and the classic metal stuff, Black Sabbath and things like that we dug as well. So it definitely, like I said, I wish we would have maybe paid a little more attention to, musical things, learned a little bit about theory and how this stuff works. But instead, I think we were just focused on getting the sounds to come out of the amplifiers.
Cool. Well, let's not shortchange the value in just getting together with friends and playing the songs you love. But
Yeah, sure.
I'm super interested to hear more about what you mean by that. You said, you didn't learn much about music, you just learned to replicate the songs. What were you missing back then that maybe now in retrospect you can see could have or should have been a part of that learning?
Well, I think just having a basic knowledge of how chords fit together, harmony, it would be one side of it for sure, and then rhythm. I'm sure that when we formed our first real band and got together with a drummer who was practiced and trained, that we were probably driving him nuts. With it. And I shouldn't lump William into that so much as me, because I know that I just didn't have it. I could. I think I could play along with a CD, okay, but in a real environment with a real drummer who could actually keep time, I didn't do so well. So I think learning the basics of rhythm, learning the basics of harmony, or just even how chords fit together in a key, that kind of thing. It would have been nice to know then. I guess I'm okay now with that. I learned it when I learned it, and I know it now, and I'm good with that. But I think starting out, that was definitely something that we missed.
Interesting. And when did that start to become apparent for you? Did you have any glimpses that, oh, there might be something you hadn't quite tapped into?
Yeah, so there were some other local bands, and we were all just good friends and would hang out. And their music was way different. It was technically less complicated, but they were writing original material, and it all sounded like a song. It sounded like a complete thought, and I could never really do that. And every solo that I wanted to take just sounded like some metal guy ripoff. It wasn't a real original thought, and I really admired those guys because they could do that. And maybe if it wasn't my style, I still could appreciate the fact that they created it on purpose. And if I ever created anything up to that point, it was completely by accident. And I think I started to understand that if I knew a little bit more about how things work on the bigger picture, that maybe I would kind of have the keys to fit this thing together, unlock some doors.
Okay, so you saw in them some of the elements that might be missing so far for you.
I think so, yeah.
How did you start to take steps in that direction? Because it sounds like at this point you consider yourself kind of a fully fledged musician in all of those regards. How did that transition take place?
I don't think it was until William went to recording school. We loved recording, we loved audio. That never really left. And he took the plunge and went to a recording arts conservatory. And I remember him calling me, and he was just bumping into good musicians that knew all of this stuff left and right out there. And so he would call me, and he would tell me, kind of not too dissimilar from the way I learned how to play guitar in the first place, which was through him. But he would call and tell me like this little nugget of music theory. And I just remember light bulbs going off. I'm like, why have I never heard this before? And now that I've heard it, it just made something make sense, whether it was, cowboy chord strumming songs and things like that. I'm like, oh, that's why that fits together. I bet I could write one now, things like that. And it just really getting those little bits of advice from people he was bumping into really helped. And it really kind of let me know that there is something to this and that I should probably spend some time getting serious because I love this stuff. I love music. It's my passion, that I should probably get to know it a little bit better.
Terrific. Well, maybe just explain for anyone who doesn't know what that cowboy thing you mentioned is.
Oh, yeah. So basically those G, C, and D chords on a guitar, they're just like the big open position chords that you're going to hear in countless songs. And I don't know, I kind of call them cowboy chords just because you can kind of hear that strumming and kind of picture a cowboy riding a horse away in the sunset, like some, Roy Rogers kind of stuff. But just that easygoing strumming.
Gotcha. And can you remember off the top of your head any other examples where William called you up and shared a nugget that then kind of opened your mind in a new way?
Yeah, I think the biggest one was when he called and told me why chords fit in a key, and he told me the pattern, the major, minor, that whole thing about how it comes from harmonizing a scale. So I remember getting on the phone and like I would write out, and he told me like write a scale. So we wrote the C scale, and then we harmonized the scale, so layered the different tones on top, and then you could kind of see the chord tones popping out, and why the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord really sound good together. And that it stuck with me. It was a huge key, and it was really a turning point for me, because then, like I said, I could kind of put some chords together, or when I was trying to learn songs by ear off of a record or something, all of a sudden these are my choices for the most part, figure out the key and these are my choices. And it just simplified things, and it started to kind of help me build a framework, or really get a glimpse at the framework that's already out there.
Very cool. And it's not easy for guitarists. Like hearing you describe that, for a piano player, that idea of harmonizing a scale kind of, it's going to click more easily because they're used to looking at the keyboard. They can look at the notes of the scale and see how the chords fit on top. Guitarists
Right.
used to thinking in terms of chord shapes. That's not an easy leap to make. So yeah, it must have taken a bit of mental work to kind of connect those dots.
I think so. The way I say it is that I probably spent as much time unlearning some things about the guitar as I did learning the guitar. And I think that there's probably a way to do it where you can kind of, um, learn music and learn the guitar at the same time, and get to a greater place a lot faster than I did. And if you take a more holistic approach rather than just an, instrument focused approach.
Gotcha. So this maybe touches on something else I was keen to ask you. You have this great video on the homepage of the Blues Guitar Institute, and you begin it by talking about things that are fundamental but often overlooked. And I think you give the examples of having great rhythm, having a good ear, and having thumb and finger independence if you're a finger picking guitar player. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about why you think those are overlooked. If they are fundamental, if they are central, why, for example, does developing great rhythm or having a good ear get neglected in the journey of a lot of guitar players?
Well, I think, first of all, I mean, it happened to me. I neglected those things. And if I don't totally want to extrapolate my reason, but I think this could be part of it is that when we're drawn to guitar, sometimes it's because of the big sounds, it's because of the flash, it's because of the wild and crazy noises that you can get out of the guitar. And so you just want to do that. It's just so alluring. Like I've got to learn that, and then it's on to the next trick. And guitar is full of tricks and those sort of trick sounds. But I think that if you just focus on that, you're going to miss this whole other piece of it, which I think builds a great guitarist. And it's just what you said. It's the having a rock solid sense of rhythm, having a great ear, being able to really hear things in your head and translate it to the guitar. Just those, to me, fundamental aspects of being a musician, not necessarily just a guitarist, but a musician.
That was really well put. And for someone listening who's like, yeah, those other things sound interesting, but I really just want to learn my Metallica licks from the tab.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you give any examples, maybe from your own story or from students you've worked with, of activities or impact on their musical life from filling in those other pieces that they might not have realized they'd been missing out on?
If I look back over my time playing, I think I just felt this huge pain moment. We kind of talked about it before, where I realized that other people who, if I'm being honest, I didn't think that they were any better of a musician, and certainly didn't spend as much time practicing and things like that, but they could do some things just in the music, in the moment, that I couldn't do. And I think that paying attention to some of these, basics, these fundamentals, really kind of give you the ability to create and to kind of own that moment. And I think what I teach at Blues Guitar Institute, I try to balance the technical stuff because that's fun. It really is. And you need it. You need it to pull off, certain things in great music. But I try to balance that with the theory, and kind of move together in lockstep and explain why. Because you can learn something out of a tab book, but that doesn't mean that you can recognize that in the next thing if you don't really understand it, and for me it's just part of me having that framework of those basics, those fundamentals. It helps me recognize things, it helps me recognize patterns, it helps me learn things quicker, it helps me not feel like a complete idiot sometimes if I'm sitting in a jam circle. I'm like, I can at least get through this. So I don't know if that totally answers your question there, but I just think that this stuff is very important to learn, along with those crazy cool things from the tab books.
Fantastic. And so I'm obliged to ask then, how do you go about learning them? If we think about music theory or we think about developing a good ear, can you share some of the ways you have worked on those things, or maybe some of the ways you help students at BGI work on those?
Sure. For for me, I think that it's just kind of in my instruction, it's just kind of baked in at all levels. So if we're going to learn a finger picking blues piece, we're going to talk about how important it is to have that steady quarter note pulse with your thumb. And so we're talking about the technique side of it, and we're also talking about the rhythm. And we're going to spend a lot of time. In fact, it's one of my first lessons for anyone that wants to become a finger picker, is just hitting the sixth string, that low E string with your thumb along to a metronome. That's it. There's nothing fancy, there's nothing flashy about that, but it can be very difficult. And a lot of folks find that it's difficult not because, well, some find that it's difficult because the thumb is now learning a new skill. So that's the technique aspect of it. But it's also because their sense of time was never really developed. And so that's an exercise that we go through, just a very simple, basic one, to try and develop that. And we do that as we build to some sort of classic example of blues. So I tried to bake it in, as you go along.
Fantastic. I love that it's integrated in that way, and that you're kind of, I don't know, implicitly conveying how valuable the theory side is and those inner skills. Thinking about the ear specifically, do you do any exercises? I know that particularly in the world of guitar, ear training can be a kind of anti-hero that's often looked on with, trying to put this diplomatically, it's often not front and center in a guitarist's studies. How do you approach ear training or think about it yourself?
I guess for me, myself, I decided that I needed to have a better ear at some point on my journey, and I bought a course, and I just went headlong into it and really just kind of memorized a lot of the intervals, and then just did these monstrous ear training exercises, and they're not fun. But they work and they help. And I think in terms of what we do with the Blues Guitar Institute and the instruction in there, it's always trying to point out, how different tones relate to each other. And even just talking simply that, this bass line is a root and a third, and not saying that it's this fret and that fret. And we try to move the conversation from the guitaristic view of frets and strings to notes and intervals. And I think that helps, at least in a basic way, make people aware of waking up their ear a little bit, and just pointing it out as they're playing it can be helpful.
Absolutely, yeah. Thinking back to my own guitar experience as a teenager, I really wish in retrospect my teacher had, just sprinkled a little bit of that explanation along the way, because, for me, I was learning guitar, which was almost purely about technique. And alongside it, I was learning music theory and studying things from the ear, and not really the ear, but certainly the theory perspective. And the two worlds never mixed. I had almost no connection between the two. So I love that you're really kind of integrating those tightly at Blues Guitar Institute.
Yeah, and I think it's probably good for me to do that for two reasons. One, for the students, and to make sure that they don't fall into that trap, which I definitely was in. I mean, I absolutely said I don't want to know theory. I was on some sort of, I don't know, weird mental trip that I thought that if I learned musical theory, somehow it would taint what I can do on the instrument. And that's, believe it or not, that's a commonly held thought, that if I learn this sort of academic approach to what I'm doing, it'll lose its heart, it'll lose its soul. And I think the opposite is true. And I think it kind of gives you, I think, an ability to put the puzzle together in a way that's uniquely yours. And like I said, I try to make sure that kind of follows through almost everything that we do at BGI, because for me, it was like this hard stop. One day I had that moment that I knew I needed theory, and then I started learning it, much like you were talking about with your, learning it as two very separate things. I did that, and I think that I think that's an injustice in a lot of ways.
Interesting. And so I'm sure a lot of people watching or listening are curious to know. We've talked about your backstory, we've definitely talked about guitar, but we've talked about, 70s rock and Metallica and metal.
Yeah,
And then we've
yeah.
also talked about Blues Guitar Institute. We're going to
Yeah.
have to join those two up for people. Where did blues enter the picture, and how did you come to be so devoted to it that you're now leading one of the most popular websites and YouTube channels for it?
Well, I think for me, I definitely enjoyed playing contemporary music, like thinking to when I was in high school, the 90s and all. But I always, maybe because of what was on my dad's radio, I always had such a huge appreciation for that 70s music stuff. And so like Eric Clapton was a huge guy, you heard his music around. And when I was really trying to get into guitar, the Eric Clapton Unplugged album came out and it blew my mind. It was nothing like this Metallica or this Sabbath stuff that I was working on. It was very different and very impressive. I mean, it really was. Like there's just for a lot of it, there's one guy and a guitar and maybe a little ensemble behind him, but just pulling off some beautiful stuff. And I remember hearing his cover of Big Bill Broonzy's "Hey Hey" on that album, and just going, I got to figure out where this stuff is coming from. And so I kind of started like listening back and finding out who his influences were, like Big Bill, Muddy Waters, that kind of stuff. And then you can go back earlier. You get like Robert Johnson, you go back and you get Charlie Patton, and then you start to realize that those aren't the only guys, that there's a ton of other um, blues musicians that kind of created what we now know as blues that a lot of folks don't know about outside of blues circles, like Blind Lemon Jefferson, Blind Blake, Blind Boy Fuller, those guys. And you listen to their music, and it's amazing. It's a lot of it's got ragtime influences and things that are so far from where I started, but I think just kind of peeling back the years and through Clapton, like going back and looking at some of his heroes and then their predecessors, you just kind of get to the birthplace of it. And I've been obsessed with that era really ever since.
Cool. So tell us more about that, where you ended up in terms of the kind of blues you appreciated and the impact it had on your playing and your musical life.
Mhm. Well, I think I have an appreciation for a lot of it, for a lot of different styles of blues, from what you would think of like the Chicago more electric sound. That's cool. I love it. Stevie Ray Vaughan, all that stuff. I love it. But I'd say that a lot of what I've been focused on over the last several years would be in the country blues genre. So whether it's Delta blues like your Robert Johnson, or Piedmont or East Coast blues that has some of that ragtime feel to it, that's the acoustic blues. And from that day and age is pretty well where I love where I love to study, love to learn, love to listen, and we do a lot of it in Blues Guitar Institute.
Terrific. And it sounds like you just kind of got sucked down the rabbit hole there in terms of learning more about
Oh yeah.
blues, listening more to blues, learning to play. But I know that at the same time, maybe not to such an extreme as jazz, but blues can be a genre where people kind of feel like I'm not a blues person, or, if I haven't got into it, it's just not for me. It sounds like you didn't have any kind of barrier or hesitation when it came to adopting the blues like that.
Yeah, there's definitely this thought out there that you've got to be born with the blues or you can't play the blues, and I run into it online a lot. And I don't think that I ever really felt like I couldn't get into the club, so to speak. But I can guarantee you that there's guys from the early, formation of blues and of the style. I bet they didn't feel like there was some sort of exclusive club that they couldn't get into. And I definitely want people to know that the blues is something that's accessible. It's a raw art form to me. It can be refined in a lot of different ways for sure, but you go back and listen to some of those records from the 30s, and you'll find people kind of inventing the slide guitar sound, or at least in America, with a butter knife. I mean, just like whatever was around them. It was crude, it was raw, but it was honest. And I think that I think all you've got to really have is the passion to learn, and you can play the blues. I mean, I don't think it's got to be something that you got to feel. You got to, those things help if you're lucky enough to be born down at the crossroads. But that wasn't me. I had to work at it. And I don't have a lot of mojo, but I try to earn it, try to work for it. And I think that's what the blues is all about to me. It seems like, some people say that you can't do it, you can't learn it, you got to be born with it. But I think it's the opposite. I think that it's so true and so honest that we can all, at some level, step into it.
And would you have any particular pointers if someone's listening and being like, oh yeah, I should get more into blues music? Where would they start?
Well, the way I like to start folks out is whether or not you're going to play acoustic blues or whether or not you're going to play more electric, you've got to learn the iconic 12-bar blues format. And so that's where I like to start introducing people to the blues. And so a song like Sweet Home Chicago or something, which is, kind of that huge song's been covered about a million times. But something in that form, it really can help you to kind of categorize a lot of blues, I think. And it's a skill that you're going to need to know, whether you do kind of work backwards in time like I did and head to the early, sort of founders of the blues, of the style, and get into the ragtime. It helps to have that basic 12-bar blues framework. And like we were talking about before, we immediately start talking about 1 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord. And so we kind of bring in some of that musicianship at a very early point, even through something like 12-bar blues.
Awesome. And I love the point you made before too about how, blues is one of those few kind of genesis genres in a lot of ways. Like you can trace a lot of modern music back to the blues in one way, shape, or form. And so yeah. I think the point you just made about understanding the 12 bar and understanding the music theory behind it, that's going to empower you even beyond the blues, I think.
I think so. And, even if you move through the 12 bar blues and you decide that you want to do more, great. But I think that will help you. Yeah, I view it as a kind of a springboard, a launching pad into the blues. But like you just said, I think it gives some of those basic fundamental elements that can help you no matter where you go.
So you were immersed in blues and this passion was clearly growing in you. At what point did you decide you were going to start Blues Guitar Institute and help teaching other people these things?
Well, I think the site's been around for 7 years. Fun little side fact, I bought the domain the day before my daughter was born. So I always know, so I always know how old the site is. But I think I knew that I had to go deeper myself. And then I had this love for this music. And I was also listening to these folks that were never in the pages of my guitar magazine of the month, And I just felt like, hey, I want to share this stuff and bring it to other people. And what I started finding is, I think more people knew about the older generation of bluesmen than I thought in the beginning. So now we've kind of created this really cool community of people. And just today, even somebody mentioned a blues picker, and I'm like, I've never heard of that person, So it's such a diverse sort of landscape when it comes to the artist that I like being sort of in the middle of it and sharing what I know, and then also being on the receiving end of some really cool recommendations for music.
Awesome. And there was one bit in a description of BGI that really jumped out at me and resonated, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. You were talking about how there's a tipping point for guitar players where you've learned all the pentatonic scales and blues scales as everyone else, but you don't know what to do with them. You can't use them in a jam setting, or you always sound the same with them. And you talk about BGI helping people break past that plateau. I'd love to hear how you do that. Like, what's different from the traditional technique-focused training that just gets you to that plateau and frustrates a lot of people?
Well, I think one way that I try to accomplish that is, I'll take a little bits and pieces of things. And one of my most popular lesson series is called Microlicks. And so it's just a set of like 3 or 4 notes that you play them a certain way. You can pick it up really quickly, but it sounds pretty bluesy. And then we start stringing the microlicks together, and then we start kind of plugging it into a 12-bar blues. And then we say, okay, well, now you can take this and alter it this way and that way and create something of your own. And all the while kind of referencing where we're playing from a blues scale, where we're hitting that flat seven, where we're doing, those types of things. And so I think it kind of, reinforces maybe some of what, or maybe not reinforce, but sort of brings to light maybe some of the scale tones, the important ones, that maybe they already know.
Interesting. And you talked too about practicing smart. And I'd love to hear what you mean by that. What are people doing if they're not practicing smart already?
Well, then they're practicing like I used to practice, which is, we're guitarists. Like we do love those loud, crazy sounds, or figuring out how to tap and do that kind of stuff. So, we can really get lost in noodling a lot, and by that I just mean kind of fruitlessly wandering around the fretboard. And I think when I say practice smart, I really mean like sit down with some intention. And I think it's okay to build in some free time and some fun time into your time with the instrument. I think you have to do that really to kind of remain connected, and really want to keep going. It can't all be work, right? You got to have some fun along the way. But sitting down with a goal and deciding that I want to work on this technique, or I want to really understand, this bit of harmony, or how to play this chord, and actually progressing through it. Not that you're going to get there in one session, but that you've got a goal and you stick to it, until you get there.
Interesting. And is that something you help people with at Blues Guitar Institute, or just kind of an embodying principle behind it all?
Well, I hope it's an embodying principle, but we do try in the courses, to make it sort of known what that end goal is. And then as people progress lesson by lesson, hopefully by the end, if you've stuck with it, and whether you need to stick on one part longer or breeze through something that you already know, hopefully by the end you've focused on something. And that's the goal of the course. And ideally you accomplish that goal.
Fantastic. Well, there have been lots of really interesting ideas in this conversation, and I just want to wrap up by saying a big thank you for joining us on the show today. If someone watching or listening is a guitarist and wants to get more into blues or develop their blues playing further, where can they go to learn more about Blues Guitar Institute?
Well, the website, bluesguitarinstitute.com, and then the YouTube channel, there's free lesson coming out every Tuesday. So you can check that out at youtube.com, Blues Guitar Institute.
Fantastic. Well, I've so enjoyed learning more about the site and your teaching. I'd admired you from afar on YouTube, but I think understanding more of what goes into each of your lessons and what's going on behind the scenes at BGI is just fantastic. And I really applaud the way you're drawing together the musicianship as well as the instrument technique. I think that's definitely the way forwards. So a big thank you for joining us on the show today, John.
Well, thank you for having me, Christopher. I appreciate it, and I appreciate what you're doing, and just happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, hey, one more thing. If you enjoyed this video, please take a second to like it on YouTube, and if you haven't already, please also subscribe to our channel there. That's going to help make sure you get all our latest videos as soon as they come out, and it also helps us reach more people, which means more episodes, better guests, and everybody wins. So please take a second to like this video and hit subscribe.